All right, guys. Let's go to another channel, another video. Have boomers pinched away their children's future? Short answer: fucking yes. Let's kind of get into it.
If you had a choice between being born in a very large cohort with many other people the same age as you, or a small cohort, not many people in your age group, compared with the generations older and younger than you, which would you choose?
Kind of large. Gives you more opportunity. It may take away the opportunity of traditional work, but it would also give you more opportunities for companionship. It would give you more economic power over the whole, because people would actually cater to you, or it would actually give you just a more of a individually. It may give you less power, but overall gives you more. But let's continue.
The conventional answer, the common sense really, is choose to be in a small cohort. Travel through life business class, not economy class. Fewer competitors in the jobs market,
which I highlighted.
Competitors in the housing market.
Also something that, you know, yeah, it would make sense if you were just all about me.
So life should be easier. The argument, and that was the argument of classic demographers from Malthus through to Richard Easterlin. The argument in my book, The Pinch, is that if you look at modern Britain, the opposite is the case. Being born in a big generation is better than being born in a small one.
Let's see.
And the big generation I'm particularly thinking of are the boomers, and I see perhaps one or two examples here in the Royal Institution this evening. And this chart defines who the boomers are and shows just how big a generation we are. Because this is the, instead of all the elaborate sort of fertility rates, this is just a very crude chart of how many babies have been born in the United Kingdom over roughly the last century. And you can see, and I think this chart is one of the most informative charts in explaining social and economic change in Britain. You can see how few babies were born in the interwar years, that big dip, when the birth rate fell down to about 600,000 or so at its low point. And that helps to explain Thatcherism, by the way. Because what that tells you is that 60, 70 years later, in the 1980s and 90s, Britain didn't have many pensioners, and pensioners drive up public spending. And then look at those twin peaks which define the baby boom.
So basically, from what I get and gather from what he's saying, and this is me putting it in layman terms, is that, I don't know, you get, when you don't have many people, that old people you have to take care of, you think that is not that big of a problem. But let me hear what his understanding is.
2 years in 1947 and 1964, when we had more than 1 million babies born. Although there is a lot of elaborate economics and demography behind that, I would just observe it was after 2 very cold winters. Followed
Gotta find something to do, right?
Extraordinary fall in the birth rate to a low point in 1977 after a very hot summer. Now, between those two peaks of more than 1 million babies born, we never had less than 800,000 babies born. And as you can see, it's been very rare that since then we've reached the 800,000 figure again. So the baby boom, and of course there's no kind of official definition, it emerges from demographic analysis and cultural trends. That baby boom, as I define, as that 20-year...
Okay. Like, we're going to get over the whole thing about previous generations. The only thing that they had to do was keep themselves busy by, I don't know, as he would put it, shagging. Hold on, what was that? Thank you, Joseph. Thank you.
Yeah, segment, people born 1945, 1960. Including the Twin Peaks. And just think of that big cohort working its way through society like a python swallowing a pig, just working through. You have...
Wait, is society the python or is it the pig? I'm kind of lost with that metaphor.
Having a surge of young people is very disruptive. 20 years after that 1947 peak, there were the Grosvenor Square riots. 20 years after the second peak, there were the poll tax riots. It is very hard for a society to absorb very large numbers of young people. And the core argument in my book, however, is that big generation have shaped Britain in our own interests. I've now confessed. I'm a boomer myself. In fact, I find most of these discussions end up where every intervention begins a bit like one of those sessions of Alcoholics Anonymous. I confess, I was born in 1961, I'm a baby boomer. So the argument is that big generation, the boomers, despite apparently the common sense proposition thinking it was going to be so tough for us, we're a big generation, in the modern world, being a big generation works to your advantage. First, you have the spending power. There's lots of consumers, so you shape markets. That's why the Rolling Stones are still on tour. That's why the Mini is still being manufactured. So you shape markets if you're a big cohort. And secondly, and it's very topical, if you're a big cohort, especially when governments do a lot, when you have a big welfare state and a big tax system, you have a lot of votes. You have voting power. For every one boomer who votes in this election, there will be about 530,000 other voters of exactly the same age. For every young person who votes in this election, there will be about 400,000 other voters of exactly the same age. So you have market power.
So what he's actually saying, which is actually something pretty, and this is why you actually see a lot of the whole shit on millennials too. It's because they know, like people know that if you have a big generation, you have to actually have something that focuses on that generation versus just like saying that generation can eat a, big bag of phallic organisms. But let's continue.
Power, and you have political power. So being a big generation has turned out not to be such a bad deal after all. Being a big generation has turned out to work in our favor. And that is the core proposition of my book. Now, I'm now going to take you through some of the evidence as how this has worked out. And it's evidence about what's happened to incomes. It's evidence about what's happened to the assets we own. It's evidence about how the welfare state has been shaped to our advantage. First of all, and I should explain just in terms of the methodology, and this is the Royal Institution. We've got to be rigorous. You don't want anecdote. You want proper social science and evidence. When I talk about generations, Go back. So when I talk about generations, you can see there what I mean, and that's partly shaped by changes in the birth rate.
Okay, so he has something up on the screen. Can you guys see it? Okay, good. You guys can actually see it. Let me actually just bring this full screen so you guys can actually get a better view of it.
Partly shaped by cultural phenomena. There's the baby boomers, there's the smallish Generation X, there's the Millennials, 1980 to 2000, and the generation after that, who haven't yet got a name.
Zoomers, they're called Zoomers.
When I talk about cohorts, I mean 5-year groups. So when we do the analysis, and a lot of this analysis is work we've done at the Resolution Foundation, the think tank where I chair our intergenerational center. When I talk about cohorts, I'm talking about 5-year groups to make it rigorous. So this is pay for successive 5-year cohorts. So if you look here, you can see that when if you compare the people born 1981, 85, their wages when they enter the workforce display the classic pattern that each successive 5-year cohort.
Okay, so this is actually pretty cool. Like, I don't know how to say it properly, but it shows that, yes, in each generations, as he describes it, it's cohorts. And it just looks as if, like, the farther up you go, the more you get fucking screwed. But let's continue.
Earns more until for people born in 86, 90 and in 91, 95, if anything, their pay is underperforming. It looks as if that pattern whereby for every successive 5-year cohort, as you enter the jobs market, you earn a bit more than the people 5 years before you. It looks as if, as a minimum, that pattern has ceased to obtain. If anything, it's going into reverse. Hence the proposition, one of our propositions at Resolution Foundation, that someone aged 30 now earns no more than someone aged 30, 10 or 15 years ago. So pay has stopped moving upwards. At the same time, the rents that people pay have gone up so that their housing costs have deteriorated, and young people aren't moving jobs as frequently as they did. All this.
So another thing, a lot of people aren't able to advance as they used to. Is that they are quite literally pay is staying stagnant. Not only is the pay staying stagnant, but rents are going up. And the thing about the millennial generation, we actually should have more power than we do. However, the boomers themselves, and I'm sure he's going to get to this later on in the video, have been holding on to that power like it's the precious thing, and been skipping out on our generation. But let's continue.
This adds. Sorry, I'm moving too fast. Let me slow down a bit. When we try to understand why young people's pay has underperformed, it looks as if one of the reasons it has underperformed is that young people aren't moving around as much as they used to, both geographically and in terms of job moves. So they're not moving house and moving job, and they're not moving job as much as they used to, even if they don't have to move house. It looks as if young people are less mobile.
And the thing about it is, anecdotal evidence aside from my own perspective, I literally have had very few multiple jobs in my lifetime. I've stayed in customer service since 2009. I've done 11 years in customer service, and before that it was retail, and it was only 2 stores before that. So my whole career in life, my career has been 6 jobs. But let's continue.
And we have various explanations for that. One explanation is the areas where pay is high, rents are now so high that after you have met your housing costs, you aren't better off. So the function, the market signaling function of a modern economy is not working because the gains from working in these high productivity areas are being captured entirely by property owners, and none of them are going to wage earners. The property owners.
So that's interesting. That's interesting to say the least. The fact that, just as I was actually saying, a lot of people are unable to move because a lot of that income that you had to actually move around. Exactly. And not only that, but most of us graduated in 2000 or less when the job market had hit a active slowdown. And of course, 2001. But let's continue.
As you might guess, are particularly boomers. 20% of boomers have a second home which they rent out. So young people are less mobile, and that's one reason why their pay has underperformed.
So, I don't know if you caught it when I brought it back up, but 20% of boomers are actually landlords. So instead of that money going to build equity with somebody who's starting a family, starting a career, it's going to somebody else's pocket. It's going to, well, I need to make income from a second property because maybe the boomers don't have enough to actually retire themselves. It's a systemic problem because capitalism. But let's continue.
Because housing is so expensive, young people are also much less likely to be homeowners. I'll show you a slide on that in a moment. There's less local authority housing, so they're very likely to be in the private rented sector. So the increase in young people in the private rented sector is another very big social and economic change.
More millennials can't actually own homes, and one that do are having so much of their wages go to housing. Most people can't afford a $400 incident. But let's continue. Exactly, as well as the dramatic increase in college tuition. But people say, hey, bootstraps.
And this is where it gets real. Some of this is not just economics. This ultimately gets down to the realities of the quality of life that young people have. And one way in which the quality of their life is deteriorated is they literally have less space. So what this chart is telling you is that if you are an owner, the purple dot is where you were in 1996, and then this turquoise dot is where you were in 2030. So be you young or old, if you are an owner, the amount of space that you occupy has increased. So homeowners have more space than they used to have. But the bad news is there aren't many homeowners aged under 45. Those who are, they're fine. If you are a private renter, the space which you occupy now, especially if you're under 45, is significantly less than the space you would have had 20 years ago. This is the difference. And
I can actually attest to that. My place in Chicago was actually fucking bigger. I can attest to that. But now I have a noticeably smaller place.
The majority of young people are private renters. And although the problem for private renters is equally acute if you're older, there aren't many people there. So by and large, the older person's story is that one. They are owner-occupiers who have more space. And the young person's story is that one. They're private renters under 45 and they have less space. So young people just occupy less space than they used to have. In fact, although later on I will talk about the phenomenon of the bank of mom and dad, there's another equally significant phenomenon, the warehouse of mom and dad. And because don't you observe, you're holding a lot of your kids' stuff. And the reason why we're holding all of our kids' stuff is they don't have the space to take it with them. So there is the boomers.
So it's actually really, really kind of strange where you actually see that just the way that we've done business with our country has actually not only, and I know he's talking about the UK, it's not only kind of hurt the millennials, but it goes back to hurt the boomers. My friend has actually banned me from saying pitchforks, the phrase pitchforks, for at least a week. I can actually say it, but not everything needs to be answered with pitchforks. Not everything I answer is a pitchfork, but still, I've been banned from saying pitchforks to Bubbles. But let's continue.
Have the space, the youngsters don't have the space. They even have to leave their stuff with us, which incidentally is one of the many reasons why they're not so geographically mobile. We'll turn to that, but one of the other features of modern society is contrary to the other question I could have asked you at the beginning is, do you think in the modern world the family would become more significant or less significant? And the conventional view among sociologists, it was part of modernity, families would be less significant social entities. In reality, what's happening in the modern world is the family is changing character and becoming more significant. The family is crucial. The ties, particularly financial ties of dependence, which now last for so long, from children to their parents, mean that the kids stay.
And conservatives want to return to family. Let's continue.
Living near where their parents are. One of the often implicit features of the bank of mom and dad is, yes, we'll fund you, of course, we'll help out with your deposit, but it'd be nice if you stayed round here. You know, we can help out with the grandkids. Then as we get a bit older, perhaps you might turn out more and help with us. Bank of mom and dad lowers geographical mobility of their children. Pretty clear evidence on that. Dependence increases. So these young people are earning less, they are occupying smaller spaces, and they are consuming less.
But yet, there's a perception that millennials are all selfish. Ha! Well, let's continue.
Now, one of the ways we boomers kind of assuage our consciences is we say, look, the young people may be having a tough deal, but it's their fault, really. Avocado toast, foreign travel, spending it instead of saving it frugally like we did. The only reason our house is worth so much is we saved up and built that conservatory. We forget the fact that inflation in house prices is massively more. I think people are beginning to recognize the sort of stereotypes here. Well, the fact is that if you look at this trend, it's another very important one. Again, it's a fundamental one. This tells us that the amount of actual spending on non-housing consumption, take the oldsters aged over 65, has, in an unprecedented change, and it's really happened quite recently, this millennium, has overtaken the actual amount of money that
One of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the
18, 20, 29s.
Ironic that's coming from
and I get
in the
lots
middle of this,
letters.
right?
Every time I do a talk like this, I get letters from these people in neat copperplate handwriting, on Basildon bond notepaper, in biro, saying, don't you know how tough things are for us? And these young, frivolous millennials are blowing all their money on modern media and eating out. The truth is, we have just gone to the point where the person writing to me on Basildon...
You know what? I actually don't understand that. I guess because people see the selfies and they think that a lot of people are taking foreign travels when it's... Man, Instagram filters can do a lot. And shit, I'm going... To me, like... A lot of it is credit card debt too. Like, I don't think a lot of people realize that millennials are going in credit card debt to do the same thing that people from older generations used to do for a lot less. Well, let's continue. Exactly.
He's probably actually spending more on consumption than the young person is. This is, so we can see these effects. It's lower pay, it's lower quality of housing, it's less money left for consumption. Now, we had an event here yesterday with the British Science Association, our Huxley Summit, here in this very lecture theatre, and it was a great event, and we talked about the challenges the world faces, and one of the most important challenges the world faces is climate change, or the climate emergency, perhaps we should now call it. And my next slide is one about that. So part of what we boomers have done is we have emitted a large amount of carbon dioxide through our lives. Behind us, the carbon dioxide production of the typical boomer has been very substantial. And one of the most interesting examples of the challenge we are leaving behind for the younger generation is if we are to reach the maximum of 1.5 degrees global warming, and you then factor in the reduction, which is the IPCC target, as you know, and we factor in the reduction in carbon dioxide emissions that is necessary in order to hold it at 1.5 degrees, and then allocate it across different generations over their lives to see what happens. And this tells you, this is a fascinating calculation, which I was able...
So, that's actually pretty interesting. Like, some of the things that you actually see with the fact that and he's been going about it for a while, that you actually see it where more people are actually, it's like, when you actually look at it, millennials aren't spending the same. They're actually consuming less. They have shittier homes, but it's the perception that, as the commander has said, it's been more, millennials have been getting the short end of the stick for the longest time, and it's been popular to just shit on millennials. But let's continue.
Able to put into the book. It's only been made recently, however. The blue chart is world, the red chart is Europe. Basically, the millennials have to produce in their lives 1/8 of the carbon dioxide that boomers will produce in ours. That is the scale of the climate change adjustment that we are expecting the younger generation to take. So this is partly a story of what's happening in the British economy. It's partly a story of a global challenge that we face. That is a massive adjustment. And here we have the typical figures. That's what the boomers in Europe, the typical European boomer, will in their...
Like, God, look at this shit. Like, this is just sad. Like, the carbon footprint, and I get it. Like, there are some things that can't be factored in, and there have been some improvements over the course of technology where it's impossible to go to those standards. But God damn, when you look at that, it's kind of sad. But let's continue.
In their consumption during their working lives typically have 700 tons of carbon dioxide, and look at what we are expecting for the millennials and post them. Very big adjustment. So the image with which I begin the book is that, you know, there is that kind of cultural meme of the parents going away for the weekend and leaving their teenagers behind in the house, and the teenagers throw up a party and other people crash it, and you turn up and find on Sunday evening your house has been completely trashed by your kids. And my argument is, actually, in the real world, if anything, it's the opposite. We have been trashing the house and then leaving it to our kids. That's the question. So that's how the economy is working. Then look at how, now let's get the role of government in. This is how the tax and benefit system working, and this is simply the effect of tax and benefit changes since 2015.
All right, guys. Yeah, like for real. Even like if you look at it, like even the most famous people on YouTube, except for like the people who, I mean, like people who actually have things outside of YouTube. A lot of them aren't multimillionaires, and even if they are multimillionaires, the bar has been raised that, let's be honest, if there wasn't streaming, if people weren't making money from doing shit like this, it would be like if we didn't have the gig economy or like just shit where like blow the fuck up, you motherfucker. There we go. If we didn't have the shit like God damn, it's just like millennials had to find different ways of actually making money, and even then we have been seen to be quote unquote lazy, when in truth we couldn't survive like a lot of the other generations did.
And this is a case study in the phenomenon I was describing earlier of the political power of being a big cohort. So this tells you that if you're older, if anything, you are a net beneficiary of tax and benefit changes, and if you're young, you are a net loser on quite a substantial scale from tax and benefit change. We vote for policies that help us older voters and don't work so well for our kids. Put all that together, and again, and now this is, I must be very careful. I am not against older people. I mean, older people, yes, I'm sorry, I have to make this absolutely clear. And in some ways, you could regard this chart as telling you about fantastic social progress in Britain. When I first got interested in economic and social policy, I worked in the Treasury in the 1980s. The assumption was being old.
And so, like, he made the point which I was hoping that he was making. And we're 20 minutes through this video, guys, so this is going to be one of those long ones, but not really long ones. He's making a point that he's not trying to be down on old people or boomers, or like he is one. Fuck, he is one. What he's saying is it is helpful that we look at not just our generation or one generation. Yeah, and like, yeah, why do you think I'm working on my day off to try to build a platform where I can actually either do more art and be commissioned to art, or actually make some sort of recurring income from this? But let's continue.
All equals being poor. But by and large, pensioners had low incomes. If you do anything for over 60s or over 65s, you were targeting poverty without really having to need a means test, because that's where the poor people were. And for 30 years, the driver of policy has been the assumption that pensioner equals poor. And what this tells us is that now, if you look at the typical income after housing costs, that at some point around 2010, pensioners caught up with working age households. This is after housing costs and allowing for household size. And it's not just in the middle, the 20th percentile, down towards the bottom. You can see there the poorest pensioner, or the pretty poor pensioner, perhaps that person writing to me on her Basel upon notepaper, is actually has a living standard significantly higher than the poorest 20% of working age families.
So, like, think about that. Even the poorest person who, may have needed government assistance, they still made more money than some of the poorest working families. That says a lot. But let's continue.
Now, you could regard that as social progress, that being a pensioner is no longer synonymous with being poor. But you just think of every feature of public policy you interact with where the assumption is old equals poor. The free admission, the free London transport travel cards, 25% of free journeys by over 60s on their Oyster cards are journeys to work. So, you know, free access. You're over 60, you're over 65, you're a pensioner. Free access. The public.
So, like, that's actually pretty interesting. A lot of it is, you would think that old people they get free stuff and they're free, so they are, in our case, on Social Security, so they're poor. And more in our cases, yeah, if you're just getting Social Security, chances are you're not affluent. But a lot of the people, the people who need that assistance aren't exactly old. Their families is trying to make sure that they cover their transportation costs. But let's continue.
Policy is based on the assumption old equals poor. That is no longer a basis on which,
thank you, FDR,
it can be robustly defended, because we just have to shift our way of thinking about what our society is like. Now, so far I've focused on income effects, incomes, wages, benefits, consumption. In the next part of my talk, I'm going to focus on wealth effects, asset.
So let's do this. This is actually becoming a little bit long. I'm actually going to do this at a later time. Let's go to another video. But he took a break right here. I'm going to actually take a break on his video right now, and I'm going to come back to it. Let's choose something else. I fucking hope, man. I fucking hope that universal healthcare would actually be a result. At least something.